Good evening, and thank you for joining the New York Jewish Week and UJA Federation of New York for our monthly Folio Literary Series. I'm Thea Wieseltier, Director of Public Programs at 70 Faces Media, the parent company of the New York Jewish Week. Tonight, we're delighted to welcome Celeste Marcus, author of Chaim Soutine, Genius, Obsession, and a Dramatic Life in Art. Celeste will be in conversation with Julia Ioffe, acclaimed author and journalist. This story centers on the world-renowned artist and his life as part of modern history's most exciting artistic communities composed of Jewish painters, poets, and writers. Our partner, UJA Federation of New York, knows the value of the arts and culture in defining Jewish identity. Whether supporting the arts in local JCCs to summer camps focused exclusively on Jewish arts to therapeutic programs, tapping into healing through creative outlets. UJA supports so many opportunities for people to explore their needs and to express our Judaism proudly. And now, to our program. Julia Ioffe, a Russian-born American journalist and Russian expert, is a founding partner at Washington correspondent at Puck. Her work has appeared in outlets including the Washington Post, the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, and Politico, and she frequently appears on MSNBC, CBS, and PBS. She is the author of the recent book, Motherland: A Feminist History of Modern Russia, From Revolution to Autocracy, which explores the country through the experiences of its women using family and political history. And tonight, the author we are spotlighting is Celeste Marcus. Celeste is the executive editor of Liberties and the author of Chaim Soutine, Genius, Obsession, and a Dramatic Life in Art. I now turn it over to Julia and Celeste. Enjoy.
Yeah, thank you so much for hosting this conversation. And thank you to Celeste for writing this book. I have to say, I have loved Chaim Soutine for a long time, but I never saw him like this until I read your book. It opened up his life, his biography, and his art to me in a way that I honestly did not expect. Um, and I want to just get right into it with you. I think I always thought of Soutine as a Jewish artist, in part because I knew he was Jewish. I saw a retrospective of his work at the Jewish Museum in Manhattan. Um, but I know that you take issue with that
Yes,
categorization of him. Can you tell me why, or tell all of us why?
absolutely. So I will say that first, I love that you know who Soutine is. That was always my first question whenever anybody asked me what the book that I'm writing was. Now that it actually exists, the book that I wrote was, it was always very exciting for me when people knew who Soutine was, especially Americans, because Russians are much more likely to know who he is, and for people who have ever been to Paris, Frenchmen are much more likely to know, but Americans are less likely. He's just there was a period in American history when Soutine was a very hot artist and everybody knew who he was. De Kooning said that Soutine was his greatest influence, but not everybody does know who he is. So that's great. If you do know who he is, and especially if you're Jewish, you have probably been told that Soutine's art is an articulation of quintessential Jewish anxiety. And Elie Wiesel said that. Like, he wrote an essay, he was invited to write an essay for a catalog in Spain, and the essay is about how Soutine's beef carcass, which I spend a lot of time writing about in the book, is actually it's a metaphor for the 20th century Jew. And it's not. And that doesn't mean that Elie Wiesel was wrong to see something real and intense and react to it, especially something that he felt himself. That makes sense to me. And I think that it tells you a lot about the the work's impact on its viewers, but it doesn't tell you a lot about what Soutine was trying to do through his work. So I don't take issue with the idea that he was both Jewish and a painter. And of course, his Judaism dictated so much of what happened in his life outside of his work. But if you understand the motion of his relationship to painting and the relationship that he had with his own work, which was really like the entirety of his life. There was an art critic, Kramer, I think, Hilton Kramer, who said that to know Soutine's oeuvre is to know his whole life. And what he meant by that was that Soutine didn't have personal relationships that were more important to him or anywhere near as important to him as his work. And what he was trying to do through painting was a project that he talked about a lot, that he was very explicit about, which was he was trying to paint what he was looking at. That was it. And that's really different from expressionists, and it's different from painters like Chagall, who are intentionally trying to put Jewish iconography, or like Moritzi Gottlieb, who was painting. I think Moritzi Gottlieb is like the greatest Jewish painter of Jewish subjects. And they're trying to give us a window into a Jewish world or a Jewish worldview. And Soutine was not trying to do that. So one thing that I wanted to do when I set out to write the book was to give people an understanding of the trajectory of his life. And there are really two forces that are essential for understanding him. One is history, and the other is painting. And they both are equally like of cosmic significance, both to him and the world, but they're not the same. So yeah, that's why I take issue with it. Oh, you're on mute.
This is what happens when you're over 40. So in the book, obviously it's teeming with Jewish artists and painters, but two that really come to mind as contrasts, especially in this idea of whether he was a Jewish painter or not. You mentioned Chagall and also Amedeo Modigliani. What made them, in your view, more Jewish painters than Soutine?
I think that Chagall was, and I think Modigliani was not what I mean by a Jewish painter, but he was very, very proud of his Judaism. Okay, so let me like just for people who might not know, and also to just give some structure to my answer and also the conversation, I just want to say like very, very broadly the 5-second version of Soutine's life. So he's born in Smilovici, which is this small shtetl, which is what they were all like. We're going to talk.
We'll get to that in a bit. Yep.
Okay. Outside Minsk, he studies in Minsk for a little bit, and then Vilna, and then he gets to Paris. And Paris was like the lights turned on for him, because it was this huge city where he could finally be in the tradition that he placed himself in, which was the tradition of great art. And Modigliani came from Livorno. He was an Italian Jewish family. His mother was, she said that she was a direct descendant of Spinoza. Now, that's not possible because he didn't have children, but it's still impressive. Like I dig the lie. Like, that's cool that you wanted that, and I appreciate it. And that is the kind of family that Modigliani came from. Like, he was taught that he was Jewish royalty, and that Jewish royalty was a thing that was, first of all, possible and also something to be proud of. And he comes to Paris, and we should also say he's gorgeous. Everybody thought he was gorgeous, and he thought he was gorgeous.
I think he was gorgeous.
And you're right. I mean, one of many examples of your brilliance. He was like the hottest guy on the town. When he was there and Picasso were there, he could compete with Picasso for who was getting the most attention. Picasso because he was the most famous and the most influential. Modigliani because he was just unbelievably charming. He would get drunk a lot, and Soutine started drinking with Modigliani. And when he would get really drunk, he would start like just speaking in entire reams of Dante in Italian and strip to the delight of all the American tourists who were like standing there watching him. This would happen like all the time. And he wouldn't get thrown out of any of the bars because they were just like, yeah, sure, whatever, do what you want. Like he was the darling and the kind of prince. And he thought of himself as a Jewish prince. In fact, like when anti-Semites would yell at his Jewish friends on the street, he would scream, Je suis juif, because he was proud of it. So that's his relationship to Judaism. And then Chagall, also very different background. He is from Eastern Europe, but he's from Vitebsk, which was bigger. And he had already, like from a young age, become a significant painter and a significant cultural leader in his community. And so when he gets to Paris, he gets there with the intention of contributing a Jewish je ne sais quoi to modern art. He wanted to be contributing something like the way that Christian artists had been contributing to like the cultural vernacular for all of human history. All of us are the children of a Christian art, even if we're not aware of it. So much of how we think about fundamental human experiences are informed by the great artists of human history, many of whom were Christian, and many of whom most of the art that we see in museums and most of the art that was in museums for a long time were Christian iconographic art. And so Chagall was trying to contribute our version of that to the world. And he set out to do that. And you can see that in his paintings. That's just not at all what Soutine was trying to do. So I do think that I hear a lot from people that Soutine's art is really important for their Judaism. And I think that that's such a powerful testament to the power and force of his work. And I'm not trying to say that that's illegitimate. I'm jealous of it. I think that that's a really beautiful relationship to have with a painter, but it wasn't the relationship that he was trying to give you. Whereas I do think that Chagall wanted Jews to look at his work and think, I'm proud of him. And he gave me a gift in terms of understanding and deepening my relationship with spirituality. And similarly, I think that Modigliani really did want Jews to be proud of him and to feel like they had this emissary to the world's greatest cultural milieu that was representing them.
So this is super interesting. And I want to go back to the beginning. You mentioned the shtetls, you mentioned where Soutine is from, you mentioned that Chagall is from somewhere a little different, Vitebsk. And I've spoken about this with you, with Leon, about how the idea of the shtetl, especially to an American Jewish ear, evokes something that isn't necessarily there, and it erases a diversity that was there, and that would have made Chagall and Soutine, for example, different from each other, even though they were both technically from, or we think of them as being from shtetls. Can you explain that a little bit more? I mean, what was the difference, and what, more importantly, what effect did it have on their trajectories in life and as artists?
Okay, so important for an understanding of Soutine that he was extremely poor. His family was very, very poor. And he was in a tiny village that there was no possibility of being anything other than that. So that's different from Chagall. And Soutine, so Soutine is from this, Smilovici is outside Minsk. He's in Cheder there. Goes to Cheder until he's 10 years old. And he's the 10th of 11 children. And by the time he's old enough to work, they take him out of cheder, which means that he was never bar mitzvahed, which I think is interesting. I know, isn't that weird? But
That is
there,
interesting.
it's interesting. Okay, another reason to sort of explain why I'm pushing back against the Soutine as a Jewish artist thing is that a lot of the sort of the shtick about Soutine and that people say a lot and that Jews talk about a lot is that um, his father didn't want him to be an artist. His father beat him. His brothers beat him. Um, his family was dead set against him ever going off to study art. That's not true. That they were horrified by the idea that he, as a Jew, would have painted because it's against halacha, because you're not supposed to graven images. And that's not that there are like very few actual instances. Most Jews don't have a problem with pictures of people. And one of the obvious like counterpoints to that narrative is that we've been doing illuminated manuscripts for a very, very long time. And Hiddur Mitzvah, which is this idea of beautifying the mitzvah, has always allowed us to make beautiful art in service to Judaism. But it was never, I think it's a little overblown. And so we're also supposed to think that Soutine's mom like helped him run away from his father to go study painting. That's definitely not true. So when he was
So where did
10,
those, I'm sorry to interrupt. So where did that narrative come from?
okay, so it's interesting, and I think basically, so once Soutine spends 10 years in Paris before he becomes super, super famous, and he gets really famous because this collector from Philadelphia, Barnes, comes over and buys 52 of his paintings, and suddenly he went from being this like really, really poor, completely unsuccessful nobody. Overnight, he becomes a celebrity, and then every person who ever encountered him or who could say they encountered him made things up about him. Like celebrities now, like it's just people pretend. We live in Washington. Like how many people have told you a story in the last 2 weeks that you are like pretty sure they made up? That like they heard over the lunch, I don't know, whatever. Like somebody told them something really interesting about something that definitely didn't happen. And that was definitely like happening all the time in Paris. There was this woman, Marevna, who wrote a memoir about her time in Paris, and she has these, they're great drawings. They're like drawings of her and Soutine and Modigliani and Diego Rivera and Picasso, and like there's one picture of them all walking down the street together. Those people were never friends with each other. She was friends with Diego Rivera, and that was it. Like there was nothing, and so they just lied. And you can kind of appreciate it. It's like a sort of spicy personality to have that much chutzpah to just completely make this stuff up. But I think that that's a lot of it. And then I think that there are pieces of it that are true. So, for example, it is true that when Soutine was in his really early teens, he was drawing a man on the street, and it was a religious man, and that man's grandchildren or children, we don't really know, saw Soutine doing that, and they beat him up. And then Soutine's mom sued the local government, and they gave him, you know, 15 rubles, and that was the money that he was able to use. So what people say about that is that was the money that he used to run away from home. That's not true because he had started studying. He left Cheder and went to go work for his sister's husband, who was a tailor, when he was 10. But then he showed a really early proclivity for painting and drawing, or for drawing, because there really wouldn't have been anything to paint with. And so they let him go, his family let him go apprentice in a photographer's lab, retouching photographs. And then at the same time, there was this guy named Jacob Kruger who had been a student, an art student in St. Petersburg Academy and then in Paris. And he came back to Minsk. And I swear, like, I think without this guy, Soutine never would have gotten out. But that he decided that he was going to go back home to Minsk, and he opened this small school. It was 3 rooms in the home of merchant who just let him rent space from him. And he took like a year and a half's worth of classes in Minsk. And And I think about this a lot because whereas Chagall was in Vitebsk and there were examples of cultural figuras who were making a living doing art. And so it wasn't like this insane leap, like this creative leap. I think about this all the time. There's this young, skinny kid, doesn't have enough food to eat. He's got like 10 siblings. Mom doesn't have any time for him. His father needs him to just be helping him put bread on the table. And he gets it into his head that he's going to go study painting. That's such a crazy thing. And that wasn't a crazy thing for somebody like Chagall. Somebody like Chagall, his mom bribed people to get him into the secular school so that he could like advance, so that he could have some kind of significant cultural life. And I think it requires for us a lot of effort to try and imagine what Soutine's childhood was like. There's no such thing as a museum. There's no such thing as even a reproduction of a great painting. He's never heard of a great artist until Kruger starts telling him about them. Kruger's been to this place called Paris, where they have this enormous building where you can go whenever you want to see the greatest masterpieces of all time. But he doesn't have a phone. He doesn't have a computer. They don't have newspapers. Like, we know, I thought this was so cool. So, the National Library of Israel, one of the greatest creations in Jewish history, has this insane database of newspapers from all time related to Jewish culture. Some of them, they're in all kinds of languages, but I like every 2 days would just search the name Soutine in the database to see what new thing was coming up. And there was this small local broadside in Smilovici that published that his must have been some kind of uncle who was also named Soutine, like had given money to Chovevei Zion, like in honor of a friend's wedding. So we knew that somebody in Soutine's family like knew about it. Was a Haskalah paper, which in itself is really cool. And that's the highest level of culture that was going on in Smilovici. There was nothing else. So I think that I get a little bit defensive for his sake when people compare Vitebsk and Smilovici, because it's so not the same. Like the courage he had to have to just leave. And then I think the other thing that it matters to understand his grit and his commitment, because it's really just by sheer will that he gets himself from this tiny cultural tundra all the way to Paris and decides that he is a genius. He is a great painter. It doesn't matter if nobody else recognizes it. It doesn't matter if nobody else is painting like him. No one's buying his work. He doesn't have like a girlfriend telling him that he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. This is just like sheer grit for such a long time. And it wasn't because he thought someday I'll be famous. It was because he could do no other. It was just, that was what life was for him. Life for Soutine was painting. And I think that there is a certain kind of grit that an immigrant has. I'm not an immigrant, but I know some. And like this idea that you're just going to will a better life for yourself. You're going to get that for yourself. You believe that you deserve it. Nobody's going to tell you that you deserve it. You know that it's your right as a human being. I see that in him. And I think that that's an intensity that you can see in his work. Um, yeah. And I think people are asking, I know, if there are pictures, and I'm just going to say, go to the Orangerie website and type in Soutine to look at some of his paintings if you want examples, or buy my book, and there are a lot of examples in there. But if you want to see like what I'm talking about, you can find them there, and those are going to be higher quality images than anything that I could show you on the screen. So, and that's what I do to see his paintings.
So, yeah, I think, to your point, when and by the way, if you don't know already, drop your questions into the Q&A, and I'm checking them as we talk, and we'll ask them as we go. Celeste, when we were preparing for this conversation or this webinar, I was really struck by what you said about exactly this, about, the force of not just will, but the force of imagination it took to imagine this life for himself, without um, a smartphone or a computer or even art books or reproductions of the art. I couldn't help but think of an old Soviet Jewish joke where, two men meet on the streets of Berdichev, and one of them is wearing a new coat, and one of them says, "Where did you get it?" And he says, "In Paris." He's like, "Oh, really? Such a backwater, and they sew so well." So, um,
Right.
so tell us about Soutine's Paris, about LaRouche, about the precarious existence he led there, about the anti-Semitism he faced, and including the anti-Semitism he faced from French Jews. Um,
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah.
love to hear about that.
This is such a fun story. I mean, it's obviously a very, very sad story and it ends miserably. But I I really got to spend so much time with just the coolest Jews. I love doing research for this book and finding out about these people. Um, and there is this like 10-year period when Soutine first gets there and lasts until he makes it big, where he is surviving because the Jews who were there already took care of him. They would not have survived without each other. And it really is very beautiful. Um, so let me like give you a sense of what I mean by this. Um, Soutine is born a year after the Dreyfus Affair just completely runs through the entirety of France, and it's like a civil war. Like this is a huge dividing line between citizens of France. And by the time he gets there, it's sort of faded from the forefront of the cultural tensions, but there's so much anti-Semitism because France was also the most liberal country in Europe. And it was the place where people went for a better life. And Soutine was one of many. There were 90,000 like old family French Jews who were in France before Soutine got there. And by the time the Nazis came, there was like 390,000. So, or I think that I'm a little bit off, but it's something like that. Like there were about, yeah, a little under 300,000 Jews came into France in that time period, which is a huge number. Because they were fleeing pogroms. There were pogroms running through all of Eastern Europe, and this was the same time when there was a huge jump in American Jews also for the same reason. And these Eastern European Jews who get to France are very, very different from the old school Jews who had been for a long time very, very warily repeating over and over again that we belong just as much as the Catholics do. Um, so they get there, and this is a familiar story. The Jews who were there already were really unhappy about this surge. And these Eastern European Jews really had to take care of each other. So Soutine arrives in Paris, and the only word he knows how to say is La Ruche, which means the beehive. And I'm not going to spend as much time as I spend in the book talking about the origins of the Beehive because I can't justify it, but it's great and you should read it because it's so much fun. This is like this crazy artist colony that exists really for reasons that are really hard to explain. It was like the whim of this very successful French sculptor named Boucher, who is friends with Rodin. And he just decided that he was going to let any artist who needed a place to stay, they could stay there, and rent was not optional, but like you could pay you paid what you could, which meant that a lot of people didn't pay. And it just ended up being the way that networks work. All the Jews ended up hearing about this, and a lot of the residents, more than half the residents of what ended up being like 120 dorms or like little homes, were Eastern European Jews. the year that Soutine got there, Chagall was living on the top floor. And the top floor was like the nicest one because I'm not going to explain why, but there's no lighting inside. So the only source of light is like the skylight that's on the top. And I went and like stood in the room that was Chagall's studio, and it is great lighting. But Soutine was on the bottom floor along with all of the other Jews who couldn't afford rent because Chagall, by the time he got to Paris, was already well known and was selling paintings, and he could afford it. And he's there for several months before he's introduced to Modigliani. Modigliani loves Soutine. There's this rumor that's probably not true that Modigliani's last words were to his agent, whom he made take on Soutine, and he said, "I'm leaving you a great man. I'm leaving you Chaim Soutine." But that is how Modigliani felt about him. And so this Soutine gets there in 1913. This is right before the World War I starts. And then, all the Jews who were scraping a living by the skin of their teeth, like barely making it, suddenly everything dried up. And so they all were like, if there was a buyer who they thought was willing to buy paintings, and they knew somebody was really hard up, they would tell each other about them. There was this Russian Jewish woman named Vasiliev who opened a canteen and figured out how to feed people every single night during the war. This is where Modigliani used to go, and he would get drunk there every single night, and she was just like totally in love with him, so let him do whatever he wanted. But Soutine would get kicked out of them a lot because he was sort of like the less attractive wingman. And there were people who were religious. There was this thing called the Triangle Bookshop, which was run by a Jew they put out this small magazine that was for Jewish painters, where it was no words. It was just reproductions of paintings. And they were doing that to try and get the Jews from Ruche to come and buy from them. There was one day, one of the Eastern European Jews ran to the bookstore and told everybody who was there that they had seen one of their friends at the Sacré-Cœur the previous Sunday because he'd converted, and it was like this huge scandal because he was actually one of the ones who kept halacha, whereas most of them were not religious, but some of them were. And this is another wonderful story that I love. So Soutine gets into the École des Beaux-Arts, which is the really fancy, prestigious French academy. And there were other academies that you went to if you didn't get in there. But it was a big deal that Soutine got in. And he was in the atelier of a man named Cormon. And there was the first day of classes. There was a painter there whose name is Manny Katz, who's Jewish. And he heard somebody humming a niggin. He could hear, he was like, am I imagining this? And he's like looking around trying to figure out who it is, the whole class. And then he realizes that it was Soutine, who was just like humming. It's just like an incredible scene. They're in this like the most Parisian, like totally not Jewish, least shtetl place on the planet. And Soutine is like humming Jewish songs to himself. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, it was clearly hardwired into him, right? It was
Right.
obviously some of the first stuff that went in. Um, I just want to point out there are a couple people on here who are relatives of Soutine,
Crazy.
and they're asking a little bit about your sources for his life, his early life in Smilovich.
So the best
And
source.
I would I would add to that about your research in general. Like, how did you do your research for the book? Because one
Yeah.
of the things that makes the book so powerful is that you kind of systematically dismantle a lot of received orthodoxy about Soutine.
Yeah. So as I said, there are some sources that are just really clear that they're made up. There was one man named Zarfin who's also from Smilovici, and his account he talks about seeing Soutine with his father. I saw that there was a woman here whose mother was Soutine's sister, so she probably has better sources than I do. But that is like the account that I respect the most of like the of life in Smilovici. And it's the one that contradicts the other ones. And there was an early, he called it a catalog raisonné, which a catalog raisonné is this, it's an official, it should be, it's supposed to be an official account that is like every expert authenticated painting that's ever been found of a particular painter. So one of my like most important source for this book is a woman named Esti Dunnow, who the epilogue is mostly about her. And she is the scholar, really the person who has spent more time with Soutine than any other person alive or dead, including him, because she has seen every painting that we know of, she has seen. She's been studying his paintings since she was a graduate student, which is not going to age her, but it's a very, very long time. It's longer than I've been alive. And she is, she knows a lot of the people who have written about him because she met them. And so if I thought like this doesn't sound right, what do you think? This account really feels like it's embellishing things that don't make sense. I mean, one of like the one that I was talking about that was like the catalog raisonné, there were paintings in there that were watercolors of like he never painted watercolors. That's totally ridiculous that he would have put those in. So that's the kind of thing that I would look at and be like, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But she was sort of like my person if I was on the fence about something. Like for example, there was a retrospective of Soutine's paintings recently, and they included paintings that I looked at them and I was like, these are not real. They can't be real. And there are lots of fakes in museums all over the place. But I went and asked her if I was right about that analysis. Like that's the kind of thing. She's when she told me that she trusted me to write the book, I felt like I got smicha from her. It was a very important moment for me.
I actually wanted to ask you, which is really going way back, why Soutine? Why did you decide to write this book? I know you paint. I mean, you paint. I have one of your paintings in my kitchen. Um, why Soutine?
So, okay. Um, the sort of academic answer is that I wanted to know what his life was like, and there was no biography. But I grew up in Lower Merion, and my synagogue growing up was a 3-minute walk from the Barnes Foundation, which is the second largest Soutine collection in the world. And when I was 4 years old, my mom she and I cut school, and she took me to the Barnes. And the Barnes is I'll say more about that collection in a minute, but the Barnes has lots of Soutines, and it also has lots of other painters who look nothing like Soutine, including Renoir, whom my mom loves.
Was
And
this, by the way, was this the old Barnes when it was the house as opposed to the
the new
museum they put it
beautiful.
in?
Yeah,
I
so
mean,
that's
they were both beautiful
totally.
in different
And
ways. Yeah.
in very different ways, and it's very different. It's a very different vibe. But you're right that it was a huge difference for me because it felt like it was in the it was in my shtetl, right? Like it's here's my shul, and here's my high school, and here's the Barnes, and they were all. I grew up so much in it, and it really
Just like
felt
Smilovici.
exactly. It's yeah. Laura Marion is in many ways like Smilovici. um, but I was walking through the museum with her, and she was having this big reaction to Renoir. And I'm 4, right? So this tells you how twisted I am. I'm looking at the Renoirs, and I really don't like them. And I really like the Soutines. And I saw somebody in the chat say, "What's with all the flayed meat?" Yeah, I don't know. It's like a real window into this mind. I think about that moment. I wonder what she thought. But I got really upset, and I said, I was like, "Mommy, I'm really freaked out." And she said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "I don't like the same ones that you like." She was like, "That's okay." And that's basically our whole relationship. So I think that that was like the beginning of feeling I am a painter and I need to go look at art and to spend time in front of it. There is no artist that I feel so at home with the way that I do with him. It doesn't, like, for most painters, it will take me like a minute and a half for longer to like get out of my head and like for the buzz to disappear and really to fall into their work, and try and figure out what they're doing. And that never happens for me with him. For me, it's like whenever I'm standing in front of one of his like great paintings, it's just like every single time is just it's like a miracle. It just feels I'm so I'm so excited by it. I'm like on cloud nine. And everything disappears and it's just like, how did he do that? How could he have managed to do that? And what I tried to do, and the reason that I wrote it, was I wanted to be able to have in my head the sweep of his work. I wanted to know if it's the beginning of his career, this is what he was doing, and then he moved on to this, and then there was this, and I have that in my head now, and that was really what I wanted. I mean, now it's even I feel lucky that I know where he was when he was painting everything that he painted, or not everything, but most of it, because atmosphere was really important for him. So it became important for me to know physically where he was when he was painting each thing so that I understood why something would get brighter or why he was moving his brush in a particular way. But that's why I did it, because I just thought I need to know everything I could possibly know about how he did this. Yeah.
Deborah, I totally agree with you. Deborah salutes your engagement. And a few people have said how you're talking about this time as if you lived there, about how you're talking about these people as if you really knew them, and just your immersion and engagement with the material and how real and genuine and vibrant it is. And I second and third that. Um, but I do want to ask, what about the flayed meat? Um,
Oh,
because I mean, I've seen it referenced as like, oh, this is his neuroticism, and
yeah.
that's what makes him Jewish. I wondered if it came from hunger. I know people like Bulgakov wrote about food very lovingly in their books because they were starving.
Yeah.
Um, so what is it about the raw meat and the carcasses? Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, I will talk about this, and I'm also going to talk about his relationship with color and his relationship with paint because they're related. Um, all right, here are two things that are really important to understand about him. One is he went to the Louvre like it was synagogue. It was all like religiously, he had to go, he had to be there for a certain number of hours a week. And he started, there are a couple of painters who you can see that he's not copying them because Soutine, this is the second thing, he always painted from life. He had to be painting what he was looking at. So I'll give you an example. Um, the really famous beef carcass, which I hope that there's a way to get a link for that. That painting, he did a series of them. There are five of them. Um, Rembrandt was his favorite artist, and the flayed ox that Rembrandt painted was at the Louvre, and Soutine saw it, and he had this idea, which is a very strange idea for a painting. I think Rembrandt is the first person who painted that. There are lots of paintings of like butcher shops, or abattoirs, but there are no paintings that are just a beef carcass and there's nothing else. And if you're an artist, you know that it's really hard to think about how you're going to arrange things on the canvas. And so it's a really big choice to just have one thing. One reason why portraits are so familiar is because they're the easiest subject. It's like the symmetry is given to you and it's really easy to place them on the canvas and figure out where everything goes. But for something like a still life, you decide where everything goes. So what he would often do is go to the Louvre, look at what the painters he loved the most were painting and how they were painting it, and then he would go home and reconstruct it. So he went and bought a beef carcass and hung it up inside his apartment. And when the color of the meat started greening because it wasn't fresh enough, he went and bought buckets of blood and threw the blood onto the beef carcass so that he could get that crimson, which is what he wanted to paint. So a lot of what you're looking at when you're looking at Soutine's painting is the motion of the energy that he's looking at, which is really, that's the subject. I mean, I tried not to repeat the word vitality 5,000 times in this book, but I that's really what his project is, energy. He's trying to paint energy. And I believe that one of the reasons that comparatively speaking, he doesn't have that many dead animals, but because they're quite memorable, they're what people often think of. And also he painted them in a very strange way. But I think that what he was interested in was how vitality flows through a creature. And so it's really not, he's not painting death, he's painting life. He's trying to paint the complexities and intricacies of an organism. And that's what you see when you're looking at his beef carcass. The same thing is true. I'm sure that people on this Zoom have been to the Met and seen the rayfish that he painted. It was in the Alice Neal show, but I think it's actually up right now. That rayfish was inspired by a Chardin painting that's in the Met, and you can go and stand just as far away from it as Soutine stood, like every week that he could go. And he saw it, and once you look at it, you see, like, he figured out, you put the rayfish in the middle, you get like there's like fish, and there's a pitcher. There are various things that he's placing on the table in front of it that are like the way that Chardin organized his own still life. But it is interesting, right, that when I'm telling you, these are game paintings. These are game paintings in the old style of game paintings. Like when you're going through the Louvre and you're seeing all of the rabbits that Chardin has painted, these are rabbits that were hunted by noblemen and then strung up like for sport afterwards. And that's what Soutine is doing. It's just that he's so not noble-y that it doesn't feel that way to us. But if you look at the composition of the paintings, that's where he's getting it from. And he painted those like, so I'll give another example. One of his really famous series is of the fowl, and some of them are turkeys and some of them are ducks. And there's, if you, I'm sorry that I keep making you put the link in there, Beryl, but thank you for doing it. If you look them up, you'll see these are like the most energetic of his still lives. It's like you can see the bird moving. And a lot of scholars have said that it was caparo, like it's what he was painting was, he was remembering that as a small child there was this ritual that, I mean, people still do it, and I'm sure there are people who do it on this Zoom call, and you can tell us about it later. But you take a bird and you swing it over the top of your head, and it's supposed to be like you're expunging your sins onto the bird. And there is this theory that the reason that Soutine's fowl still lives, which were inspired by Chardin, these are inspired by game paintings, which are so different. But this is what he would do. He would take, it's sort of like what Steinbeck did with the Bible. Like it's the same, but it's really, really not the same. It's his thing. Yeah. So I feel like that's a good long answer to that question.
Um, I do want to ask, because this really struck me when we spoke about it before this conversation, the parallels between the precariousness of Soutine's life in Paris, the precariousness of the lives of other Jewish painters in Paris, and then what ultimately ended up happening to them, which is, not a spoiler, given that we all know what happened to Jews in Europe in the 1930s and 40s, and the parallels to today.
Yeah. So one thing that I love discovering about the lives of these Jews, as you say, it's not a spoiler what happened to them. And I do have a long section at the end of the book that I still can't read it without crying. It's really heartbreaking because it is true that I spent a lot of time with these people and I do feel like I knew them. And so it really is so heartbreaking that so many of them died when they did. Um, it's horrible. But I think
Sorry, it appears that Celeste is frozen. It's not just for me, right?
No, I thought it was me, but it's not just me.
what happened?
Celeste, I don't
Yeah,
know. You there?
I'm there. Sorry.
Okay.
Anyway, where did I cut off?
At the very beginning.
Oh, sorry, everybody. Um, so I was saying that there was one of the things that I really loved learning while I was doing this research was about how these Jews took care of each other. And like really how much they all needed each other. And that is such a familiar thing because they got there and all of them, their legal status was not clear. Their legal status changed. What papers they needed, when they needed changed, who was safe and who wasn't safe. Like they all needed, as everybody knows, since this is apparently a feature of human life forever, is the status of the immigrant is just constant precarity. So if you had what you needed, so I'll give you an example. This is like towards after Soutine has already become famous and really like far after he's moved out of the community of Jewish immigrants that he came into, because once he was financially stable, he really moved out of that community, which is sad, and makes me angry. But he fell in love with a woman who was an atheist who never practiced Judaism, but also a Jew from Berlin. And she had moved to Paris because of Hitler. And she gets there and they're there. They have like this brief window of time together where they're in love. And she's taking care of him. And really, like, she wrote a memoir about their time together called Mes années avec Soutine, like many decades after he died. And it's clear that her whole life was just about him and just about the few years that she got to spend with him. And she gets there and they have just a few years together before war is declared again. And then she becomes the citizen of an enemy country. And so this is at this point, this is like, right, this is 1939. And Soutine is really sick and they're in hiding because she can't travel. And Soutine needs to get into Paris. And they just happened to have gone on a trip for his health, like to a small village, like outside of Paris, but he's like sneaking back in constantly. And then because she's been told that she can't leave. And the local mayor is like very strict about this, and he knows that she's there. And so in the middle of the night, one night, it's very dramatic. They walk many, many miles to the train station. This is like these two Jews sneaking into Paris in 1940. And they get there, and that day, the next morning, there's a notice in the newspaper that says that all German citizens have to report to a specific place inside Paris. And they go because people do this, they report themselves, and they never see each other again. But she was rounded up with all the other Germans, and then the French let Vichy come on in. And so she was let go because they were victorious. And then it's the Jews that are being hunted. And she somehow made it through the whole way. But it was just like that idea of how quickly it goes from being you're safe. Actually, no, you're not safe anymore. You're safe. You were just in hiding. Now everything is fine. That like the way that you want to, and for them it was true. You want to say the least important thing that is happening in their lives is politics. She did not care about politics at all. Like that was just not what was important to her. What was important to her was that she was in love with this man. And all that mattered to him was painting, which is sad. Like she really does think he didn't love her. I think he did, but it wasn't the way that a normal person is in love. And you want to say like that their lives were so much more than the times that they lived in, but nobody's lives are outside of the times they live in. And I think one of the reasons why the book, why the way I talk about the book sounds like I was living inside it for the years that I was writing it is because I was so desperate to get as close as I could to this person who had a thing that was so much more important to him than anything temporal, which was his work. And that was like a saving grace for me. It's really hard now.
Yeah. Celeste, thank you so much for your brilliance, which you put into this book. Thank you for sharing it with us. I think I speak for everybody when I say I could listen to you speak for hours, and I get to sometimes. But
Mutual, baby.
you are truly one of a kind, as is your book. Thank you so much for writing it. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your passion with us tonight. Thea, thank you so much for organizing this. And thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. And for those of you who are watching the recording, thank you for watching the recording. And thank you everyone for sending in your amazing questions. Thank you so, so much and have a good night.
Thank you, everybody.